this. If love can be like this, I don't know. We more. Too much love, we more. I don't know. We more. Too much love, we more. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Monet, aka Political Bae, and this is episode 2, titled, Is Masculinity Inherently Toxic? Right? So before I answer this question, I want to sort of give my disposition towards it. I'm a young black woman who is going to be talking about this from her perspective and my experiences, and also the historical context that I have been aware of thus far in my, academic endeavors, right? So, is masculinity inherently toxic? I think that hegemonic masculinity is inherently toxic. And when I say hegemonic masculinity, I'm talking about how imperialism, which is the idea of, a nation or a country expanding their power and their sort of military hegemonic forces into other cultures and things like that. I'm talking about that from that perspective, right? Because when, imperialism that came following this transatlantic slave trade that gave us all of these concepts that we know of as race and sex and genders and what is pure and what is unpure, what is civilized, what is not civilized. When that period of history happened, that is the sort of world that we're living in today, right? So hegemonic masculinity is the idea, or at that time, where the British sort of created what is the man, what is the masculine power that dominates the world, right? So then we have patriarchy, which is the idea that, men are in power and they're at the top of it. And it's the system that provides men the sort of power, and I'm not saying men in terms of all men, white men, the power to dominate society, right? And sexism is obviously a symptom of all of those things. And all of these things are a symptom of what we know today as white supremacy. That's why the discussion about toxic masculinity is one that is very nuanced when you're talking about it, depending on who's talking about it, where they're coming from. Is it a race thing? And yes, it is a race thing, right? So everything that I'm going to be talking about is going to be talked about from the perspective of a black woman looking into the black community and talking about the black community. Okay? So, toxic masculinity exists within the black community when we think about things like a man asking someone for their number and her deciding to say no, and then I throwing a drink on them, which I just saw a video on Twitter about, or even, harming them physically. I've had instances where you tell somebody you don't want to give your number to them, and they've like violently reacted, whether it's been verbally or physically. Everyone has seen this. Every woman that you ever speak to can give you a recollection of her dealing with this, or one of her friends dealing with this, right? So there is a toxic practice of masculinity within the black community. And another example of that is, the idea that we choose abusers because they are black men over the black girls and the black women that we should be protecting, right? And a way that plays out is, we can talk about the R. Kelly situation, but we could also just take a look at some of our families, right? How many times have you been told, oh, don't wear that in the house because the man is around? How many times have you been told, oh, watch out for Uncle Jesse, because, there's something wrong with him, right? Instead of the femininity in women in this instance being protected with that, other people are sort of left to fend for themselves, to uphold, the idea of, this toxic representation of black maleness, right? Not saying, all of black masculinity is toxic. I believe that there are toxic pieces of the expression of black male masculinity, right? In reference to that, black women also uphold toxic masculinity, right? We know that
the person that bailed out R. Kelly was a black woman that literally, owns a daycare. She's in charge of protecting people's children, girl children, boy children, right? And she is protecting this, male masculine energy that has harmed the community in such grave ways. And that is a really macro example, but you can think of many micro examples to which you've watched women that you've known protect, violent things that stem from patriarchal ideas of the expression of black male masculinity, right? Another example of that is the homophobia that exists in the black community, right? That is the epitome of, the expression of toxic masculinity within our community. And both black men and black women participate in this, right? The man, I forgot his name, this is so bad, that just wore the tuxedo dress to the Oscars. He has received backlash here, there, and everywhere from black men and black women, right? And a lot of the times black women can be our own gatekeepers of, our own misogyny that stems from this sort of imperialistic, patriarchal, sexist ideologies that have been pumped into our community, right? Like, we have heard time and time again how, both black men and black women have literally victim blamed children, right? Like, we watched it throughout the R. Kelly situation and the Bill Cosby situation. And there are people that are willing to die on the hill of this expression of toxic masculinity. Now, what I want you to not get from this video is that I am here to say that black men are trash and this and that and third, because that is not what I'm here to do. I have a younger brother that I love dearly, and I work with him very closely to sort of get a handle on how he wants to express his masculinity in a healthy, non-oppressive, non-detrimental way to women and to men all around you, right? So, like, when we see black men that are like, ridiculous womanizers, and we laugh and we joke like, oh, like my son this, my son that. But what's really happening to that black man is he's filling a void. There's a hole there. There's something missing there. There's a love and an empathetic nature that he is not able to tap into because of some traumas that has happened throughout his life that he probably doesn't even know or is not even conscious that he needs to work on, right? So what I'm really calling for is for both black men and black women, predominantly though black men, to look deeply into themselves and sort of figure out, am I participating in toxic masculinity? Like, the last time, like, I checked, what traumas am I holding on to that I have not unpacked that I really need to tap into, right? And the first, and my advice, because again, I'm not a black man, I'm a black woman, so I can only speak from what I know and my experience, right? Education is step one. Google is free. I would suggest everyone start with reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. He talks about not even being able to sit down and figure out who he was until he was in prison, because society has never given him a chance to think of himself as a black man and what his relationship to masculinity and malehood meant in America, in a world that strives to have blackness be on the bottom of the totem pole, right? And for black women, you can start with the autobiography of Malcolm X, but you can also pick up any Bell Hooks book and start there and read and sort of understand this sort of relationship that happened with black women and black men throughout slavery, right? Because in slavery, the way that white feminism functioned, whereas the white male was their oppressor, black women and black men were on that auction block together, right? We were our only, companion. We were our only support, right? So now that, we're in society and we are in a white, male-centered, white supremacist, patriarchal society that we exist in, we have to think about how those ideologies come down and trickle into our community and how it has us acting towards each other and within one another, right? I'm not saying that either party is, ultimately wrong, or, well, I won't say that. I probably am saying that. The bottom line is, I don't believe that masculinity is inherently toxic. I think there are toxic practices of masculinity, and I think that Black men, because again, I am talking to my community, and Black women, but predominantly Black men and Black people that, you know, don't subscribe to binary womanhood or manhood. If you practice masculinity, you have to take a deep look into how that masculinity is practiced, because hegemonic masculinity that you are taught under these systems of imperialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy is not the best way, nor is it the most conducive way to participate in a community, right? If we are building community and we're trying to get the Black community off of the ground, we cannot oppress and literally denigrate 50% of that community. Just because someone is female, someone is feminine identifying or feminine expressing, does not mean that they are inferior to you, right? Like, and those ideologies come from the system and the world sort of social concepts that we know to be now. Those things were created after the transatlantic slave trade. Those things were put into place, you know, as white supremacy has developed into the system that it is today, that also, you know, takes place to develop patriarchy and, you know, imperialism and cultural hegemony that we're still witnessing and seeing today. So that's what I believe in terms of toxic masculinity. Um, if you'd like to chat, if you have any discussion points, any comments, please leave the comments down below, or come to my Instagram and we can chat there at Monet Who Else. You can also at me on Twitter at also Monet Who Else.